Hello and welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be covering the Pennsylvania GOP governor's primary between the two frontrunners, Doug Mastriano, state senator, and former Congressman Lou Barletta. So we'll be taking a look at their various strengths in the primary, as well as some polling and the breaking news that has come out just about an hour ago that we'll be taking a look at that could really shake up this primary if it comes to fruition. So we'll take a look at all that. But first, before we begin, I just want to note that I want to try and upload on this channel at least 4 to 5 times a week now that midterms are in full swing. So there'll be a lot of content coming out. So please, if you enjoy these videos, please consider subscribing down below, hitting the thumbs up if you enjoy. So let's get right into the video. So as of the latest polling out of the governor's primary here, Doug Mastriano has a solid lead against Lou Barletta. He's up about 10.4% in the aggregate of polls, and as of early April, he's been leading in every single poll thus far. Now, this has concerned a lot of GOP insiders and various GOP politicians, and we'll talk about why later on in this video. But Lou Barletta originally was the favorite to get the nomination. You know, going back to even early April, he was leading in most of the polls that were conducted. Obviously, Mastriano had some leads, but he was always in first or second. And still, he is in second place. He's never really lost that, except in like 1 or 2 polls where he's actually down by a point or so. But again, there's always a margin of error. And I've also heard that there's a number of sampling concerns with these polls, so we don't know how accurate they are. But if Mastriano has a 10-point lead, I'm going to assume that he's leading in the polls. That's a pretty sizable lead. It's not a 3 or 4-point lead that could easily be overcome. But with a few days left until the primaries, there's still a lot that could happen potentially to change this race. But as of right now, Mastriano is the front runner. Now, something I'll note right away, there's still a sizable chunk of undecideds, even in the poll going back end of April. You have 34% of undecideds. Now that number is getting smaller as more and more people are kind of coalescing around their candidates. And of course, you have Mastriano and Barletta, but you also have McSwan and White, 2 other candidates that are also fighting for 3rd place, and they're taking up a sizable share of the vote as well. But Mastriano has a clear commanding lead. And again, that wasn't always the case. This has only been sort of a recent phenomenon as of early April. So if we take a look back at the 2020 election, it's no surprise why the governor's race in Pennsylvania will be extremely competitive. Joe Biden only won this state by 1.2%. This is a state that re-elected its Democratic governor, Tom Wolf, back in 2018 by a whopping 17 points. So, you know, even in a blue wave year, that's pretty impressive given that Pennsylvania is a swing state, but was incredibly popular and still is a fairly popular governor out of the state. Now, on the Democratic side, you have Josh Shapiro, who is the current Democratic Attorney General. He's, I think, in his 2nd term now. And he outperformed all of the other Democrats on the ballot in 2020. That includes Joe Biden, all the other Democrats on the ballot. And he's raised over $18 million in this race so far. And that dwarfs the spending of any of the other GOP nominees. It might be more than all of the other GOP nominees put together. Now, Barletta, we're going to talk about first. He is actually in 2nd place right now, but he has run a very interesting campaign, to say the least, and I wouldn't have advised him to run a campaign in this sort of way. But originally, he was banking on his name recognition to win this campaign, specifically in northeastern Pennsylvania, where he's from. He's from Hazleton, which is in Luzerne County, which, by the way, was a county that was a 2 times Obama voting county that ended up voting for Trump in 2016 and 2020 by safe margins. So that is an interesting note. But if we go back to the 2018 Senate primary, in which Barletta was the Republican nominee to go up against Bob Casey in the Senate race back in 2018, Barletta crushed in the primary, and he did so because he had extremely strong backing in northeastern Pennsylvania. You see Luzerne County, bright red, Carbon County, these other areas in northeastern Pennsylvania getting a huge share of the vote because he already had wide name recognition in this area. It's where he's from. His congressional district was in this region, so already he has a huge geographic strength, and I think that strength will still be evident in the primary on the 17th. I still think Barletta is going to do very well in Luzerne County, Carbon County, Monroe County, all these important counties here in northeastern Pennsylvania. I think that Mastriano is probably going to have his base of support here in western and southwestern Pennsylvania and the central region as well, which is where he's from. You know, if we go to his Senate district here, basically makes up Adams County, Franklin County, these areas right on the map here. So I think Mastriano is going to do strong in the areas where he's from, possibly do well in western Pennsylvania, but I think Barletta is going to do very well in northeastern Pennsylvania. And I really do wonder where these candidates, McSwan and White, are actually going to end up. Because in the polling, they're relatively high, but I've heard that the polling does oversample older voters, so they might actually do worse in the actual primary results. I think Barletta and Mastriano are probably going to be ahead of them by at least 8 or 9 points, respectively. So I think that they're not going to be that big of a factor going into this. But Barletta is a formidable contender for the nomination. Now, if he had run a smarter campaign, and not relying on name recognition, because Barletta didn't really run any ads in the primary. I just saw a video a couple days ago where Barletta said he was just starting to run ads now. I think it's way too late to be doing something like that. And Barletta should have been running those ads as soon as he lost the lead in the polls and when he started losing to Mastriano by 8 points. And that was kind of the consistent trend. So if I was advising his campaign, he should have done that a lot sooner. And obviously, Barletta did have a fundraising problem. He did have a fundraiser at Mar-a-Lago. He was getting some money, but he really wasn't doing as well as Mastriano, who is the grassroots, very Trumpian candidate, was at the Capitol back in January of last year. So he has a huge rural conservative following. He has a lot of older support as well. And I think that's really going to help him in the primary on Tuesday. He's having his message shared through social media, and I think that's something that Barletta really doesn't have. I've heard from multiple people that live in Pennsylvania that Barletta's campaign, at least back in the winter, was kind of a mess. There really wasn't a strong ground game going on. And I think Barletta was banking way too much on the fact that people would recognize him from the 2018 election. And I think because you have Mastriano, who's proving to be a very formidable contender and right now is the favorite to win the nomination, at least according to the polling, that was a giant mistake. Now, in terms of electability, I think Lou Barletta is definitely the much more electable Republican candidate. He still aligns with Trump on many, many issues, almost all issues. But Mastriano has a lot more controversial opinions and takes on issues, and he's not as polished as somebody like Barletta is. Doug Mastriano has described himself as a Christian nationalist. He said some stuff about Q a while ago or whatever. That's really terrible optics when you're going into a general election. I think that's really going to hurt him. A lot of Democrats are very excited at the prospect of him winning this nomination because it will be easier for them to win the governorship. Now, I'm not saying if Mastriano wins, it's a foregone conclusion that Democrats win the Pennsylvania governor's race. You're talking about in 2020, Donald Trump getting 48.8% of the vote in a year where Joe Biden won the popular vote by over 5 points, and Donald Trump was the furthest right-wing Republican nominee in decades. So Pennsylvania is shifting. So of course it's possible that somebody like Mastriano can win. Something I think Mastriano has going for him is he seems to have an appeal. He's a veteran. He's a 30-year veteran. He has an appeal with like the rural working class, and that's a huge base of the Republican Party now, the white rural working class particularly. But I think it'll definitely hurt him in areas like the suburbs, where I think Barletta will still do well with the rural white working class, but will do slightly better in the suburbs. And ultimately, he's going to have a more comfortable victory than somebody like Mastriano. I think if Mastriano is the nominee, I think as of now, the race probably leans in the Democrats' favor, just from an objective standpoint. Shapiro is a very strong candidate because he has lots and lots of money. He has wide name recognition, and he's very well fundraised. And even in a year that is tough for Democrats, we've seen Pennsylvania go blue before in red wave years. In 2014, they unseated incumbent Republican Governor Tom Corbett by over 10 points. And that was during a year where Republicans flipped back the Senate and even gained in the House more than 2010, which a lot of people didn't even think was possible, at least on the House aspect of how many seats they ended up winning. So certainly Pennsylvania is a toss-up right now. And I say if Mastriano wins the nomination, it's probably in the Democrats' favor. If Barletta wins the nomination, I'd say it's slightly in the Republicans' favor. He's definitely a more palatable candidate for the suburbs. And even though you're going to have more Republican voters voting, he really only appeals to conservative base voters. He's not really, I don't think a lot of his positions are going to appeal to independents as well. If he does win, it's going to be based on the backlash from the Biden administration and the Democrats rather than, enthusiastic support from independent voters and the like. So if we take a look at the breaking news now, Trump, who had mostly stayed out of this race, says that he's likely to endorse a candidate and he's leaning towards Doug Mastriano as of right now. If history is to tell us anything, it's that a Trump endorsement in a primary like this really does go a long way, even this late into the game. You know, we saw in Ohio, Trump endorsed J.D. Vance just a few weeks before the primary, and J.D. Vance ended up winning by about 10 points in a pretty contentious primary. This is a little bit different, though. It might be a little bit too late. If Trump does endorse Barletta, it might be enough to put him over the finish line. But if Trump endorses Mastriano, I think it's a done deal. I think Mastriano will win the nomination, no question about it. He's already up in the polls. I think Trump endorsing Mastriano would probably convince a number of voters backing these lower tier candidates to jump on Mastriano's bandwagon and ultimately carry him to the nomination. So, you know, this is a really interesting primary because I'd say that Mastriano is definitely a gamble for the Republicans. If I was a Republican strategist, and a lot of Republican strategists they're trying to come up with ways to get the base to coalesce around a more palatable candidate, somebody like Lou Barletta, for instance. You know, so I think the GOP realizes that Mastriano is a real dice roll. Now, like I said before, I'm not saying that Mastriano will lose this race if he's the nominee, but it's very unlikely that he would do better than somebody like Barletta in a general election. Now, one thing I think could come out of this, and, you know, from what I've been seeing with the Republican base in Pennsylvania, is that a lot of Republican voters are not happy with Trump's endorsement of Oz. So I think perhaps a way to appease the base would be to endorse somebody that's more like them, somebody like Mastriano rather than the other candidates. Now, both Barletta and Mastriano have been running very pro-Trump campaigns, but I think at the end of the day, Trump wants to pick winners. That's something he said many times, and many people in his staff have also backed up. So I think if Trump was smart, I think he would endorse Lou Barletta because I think he is a better, stronger candidate for the general election. But I think ultimately Mastriano might end up getting the endorsement because he has that grassroots support from the base. I think Trump wants to try and make amends with a portion of his base that isn't happy with the Oz endorsement. Again, these people are not turning on Trump because of that, but I think Trump still wants his endorsement to have a large impact. And I think if, Oz ends up losing the primary or something like that, and say he endorses Barletta and he also loses the primary, that gives Trump's endorsement a little bit less power, which is something he definitely doesn't want. He wants to have a strong influence in the Republican Party going forward. So ultimately, we'll really see what happens on primary day. I might make another video the day before giving my final prediction on both the governor's primary and the Senate primary. I have a poll up on the community tab of my channel, so please vote in that poll who you think will win the Pennsylvania governor's primary. So anyway, that's going to be it for today's video. Please leave a thumbs up if you enjoyed, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell notification so you don't miss any more videos. Share these videos with your friends. We want to try and grow the channel as much as we can. And as always, again, thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.